Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well today, and welcome back to today's second half. Before we get into the second half, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And last but not least, if you'd really like to help this channel to continue to grow and go, just simply subscribe and click the like button. It's fast and free. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's second half. Shall we? Today's first encounter. Me and a group of my friends, there's 4 of us in total, go to hike Blood Mountain in Georgia, a sacred mountain for the Cherokee from my understanding. The hike starts off nice enough. It starts getting foggy, which we think's pretty awesome looking in the woods. Everything's going fine until I go onto this path that looks freshly made. I walk down it maybe 8 feet, and I see a single hoof print embedded really deep in the dirt. It looks pretty fresh. My immediate thought is boar, which we weren't prepared to deal with. So we go back and head on. I think back now and it seems too big to be a boar, but I don't know anything about how big they get. About 30 or so minutes later, we start hearing stuff behind us, rustling in the woods, and at one point, we heard a soft roar. It sounded really strange, and quite frankly, I've never heard anything like it. We're getting nervous, but we continue on. Eventually, we come onto a side trail that's marked for shelter. I'm curious, so I went and checked it out. It's longer than I'd like, but I kept going. About 2 minutes down the trail, I hear a huge rustle right next to me. Naturally, I get the heck out of there. Running back to my group, I explain what I heard to them, and they think it may have been a bear. Nothing supernatural or strange comes to our mind. We continue on to the top without any problems except for some really strange smells, and the fog is thickening. It's on the way down that we have the real experience. The fog is getting extremely thick now. The visibility is probably 7 feet in front of us at its lowest point, and about 5 feet ahead at the highest towards the end of the hike. We start back the way we had come from, the peak, and I see something duck behind a tree. It was in my visibility, so it wasn't the fog playing tricks on me. The best way I can describe it, it's definitely humanoid, about a little over half my height. It was black and light gray, and it had fur. I didn't get a good look at its face. I looked behind the tree, and there was nothing there. Keep going, the fog's getting thicker. As we continue, we start hearing noises behind us more often. The most concerning moment was the fact that we couldn't hear natural noises. The rain's raining, but there was no wind, no birds chirping, nothing. The only sound we could hear was us. I should explain that we were having difficulty coming down the rest of the hike since one of our friends was having trouble with his ankle, causing us to rest quite often. It was during one of these rest breaks that I had to take a leak. I'm slightly in the woods, but not completely because I was too freaked out to venture away from the group or go off the trail. I hear this heavy breath in my ear. I gasp, turn around, and nothing's there. We continue on, and 20 minutes later we start hearing the rain and natural noises again like normal. Nothing beside the noises continue. Until we get off the trail up the mountain and onto the one off the mountain. We're resting on some rocks talking about stuff we saw when 6 bursts of roar come from in front of us and behind us. It was the same sound as before, and there was no break in between them. It finished with a sound I can't really explain. It was like a mixture between a roar and a snort, and it was right next to me. I shouted, grabbed my knife, and turned, and of course, nothing was there. It was at this point the troubles with the hiker's ankle was bad. We had to split up into two groups of two and grab the car and wait for them at the trailhead. Me and another friend go off to get the car, eventually finding the road. We find the two of them, and one of them says they saw an old man in what he says are scout uniforms. I'm assuming he meant Boy Scouts. He said he was in a green and brown button-down shirt and khaki pants. Just standing there between two trees, stepped right and disappeared. We get out of the area and the fog immediately lifts. We all agree we were being followed, but by what is the question? Some of us think skinwalkers, but I believe those are Navajo. Goatmen were an option being considered, especially with the lack of natural noises. Today's second experience. I'll never forget the night of August 14th, 2021. I was fishing the river with a friend in a suburb of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. We loved coming to this public park to fish because it was quiet and there was a nice sandbar to fish from. This park had Sioux Burial Mound about a half a mile from our spot. After fishing for the better part of the day, we decided to leave at dusk. In order to get back to our vehicles, we had to take a trail through the woods, which was about a 5-minute walk. I put a clip light on the bill of my hat so we could see the trail. I remember when I first glanced ahead down the trail, I saw two singular white lights that I assumed were fireflies. Once we got further down the trail, we were closer to the area where we had seen the fireflies. It was then that I saw a pair of eyes that were either highly reflective from my light or glowing white. It wasn't long before I could make out a body. It was a very large white body on 4 legs, bigger than a wolf but unnaturally skinny. I couldn't make out any facial features because its eyes were so bright. I wanted to warn my friend, but all I could manage to say is there's something there. We had no choice but to proceed because this was the only way back to our vehicles. This thing just stared us down, but didn't make a sound. My friend yelled at it to try to scare it away, but it didn't react at all. I yelled at it after she did, and it responded back, mimicking my voice. I honestly questioned myself and thought I was imagining things, so I yelled at it again, and it responded back in the same voice, same pitch, exactly like my voice. At this point, we realized this was no animal. We both continued on the path in silence, but I maintained eye contact with this creature. I felt like this thing was ready to attack us at any moment, but it just stood there staring. Eventually, we were out of the woods, and I could no longer see its eyes. We did make it back to our vehicles, and felt a sense of relief. I asked my friend, "Did you hear that talk back to me?" She said she did, and it sounded like my voice when it responded back to us. If she hadn't heard the voice, I would have assumed I had imagined it. We went over what happened, and our stories were the same, except she said the creature had a wolf-like head. After our experience, my friend, who is Hmong, went to see a shaman. The shaman believed it was an evil spirit and performed a cleansing on her. She was still shaken up by the experience after several weeks. I tried to hire a spiritual advisor online, but when I described the experience and asked for a spiritual cleansing of my own, it said they were not available at this time. At the advice of one of my friends, I burned some tobacco and said a prayer that the entity would leave me alone. It took me several months to just feel normal again, but I still think about it on a weekly basis. I tried to do further research and contact the management at the park. They said the park we went to had ancient Indian remnants scattered along the river that were unmarked. They said there were more Native American remains in the park than any other park they had managed. I contacted several Native American friends, and they said possibly we encountered a skinwalker. I know skinwalkers are part Navajo culture, but from what I read, it checks more boxes than any other supernatural being or cryptid. Well, yeah, skinwalkers are Navajo lore, that term. But the Ojibwe have a creature they call the bear walker. And I'm almost 100% certain that most Native American cultures have a creature like that. My culture has the Wendigo, same as Algonquin, Huron, others. So I'm assuming, yeah, there are creatures that the different Native American tribes had that were very similar to a Navajo skinwalker. Oh, and really quick, for those of you that are new, the Wendigo is not what the movie or what Reddit or creepypastas have you believe. It doesn't have antlers. It doesn't have a deer head. It does not look anything like these movies. It's a emaciated human being, or a wisp in nature, an evil spirit, the wind, or the kind of creature-ish version that I've seen in paintings on some Mohawk museum, is a large kind of white squatch looking creature, but not, it has a tail. It's a little smaller than a squatch, but in height, but not in width or strength. So, moving on. Today's third experience. Let me say first and foremost, I am a man of logic and explanation. I never believe in ghosts or cryptid beings really in my life, but something happened recently that really made me weirded out. So I live somewhere in between the country and town here in Florida and see an abundance of wildlife, fox, coyote, raccoon, all very normal to see. Since there is a large fox population around here and most people have chickens, everyone has large dogs, including myself. I have a 75-pound boy and a 60-pound girl pit, both fearless. They know this is their property and they protect it as such, alerting me if they hear anything. And if they do, I open the door and they run out and chase off whatever it is. So, this one night, I woke up randomly, and it was disturbingly quiet outside. Not a single cricket. My dogs were not on my bed like they usually are. All of a sudden, a howl like I had never heard went off like a siren that sent a chill down my spine. Like a deep yell almost, but definitely from an animal. I turned the lights on in my house to see my pits at the back of their dog crate shaking. I've never seen that look on my dog's faces before this. Pure terror. So I turned off the lights, grabbed a flashlight, and looked out the back window. What I saw 200 yards off by the tree line near the back of my property was this canine thing. Vaguely saw it, but it was very similar to a hyena built, with a large amount of fur on its neck like a mane. Almost in skinny back legs, its head looked very wolf-like, with erect ears and a large skull. This thing was huge. It was so black it was hard to make out its distinct features, but its presence scared basically any living thing that was around it. The next morning I went to that spot. I saw this animal, but saw no tracks or hair or anything. But I know what I saw, and never saw anything like it before. We've been having a lot of dead dogs in the area, dogs that are large and are being killed by something. People think it's coyote or feral dog, but I think it's that thing that I saw. Just seeing my dog so terrified really scared me. Today's fourth encounter. This happened about a month ago in Champaign, Illinois. I live in a neighborhood in town a few blocks away from the main city streets around Madison University, if you're familiar with the area. I was in my front yard doing some yard work on the west side of the yard is lined with tall evergreens, and they are sparse enough to see through a lot next to me and the house on the other side. I paused and I noticed some movement through the trees. An animal running, trotting from the back lot to the street. I decided to watch it, just in case it was a dog from the house on the other side of the lot, and it needed to be returned to the owner. When the animal entered the street, my immediate thought was, it's a baby deer. It ran like a deer, and it was about the size. But then I realized this was no deer. Its body looked more like a dog. It really looked like a cross between a deer and a dog, but looked like neither. It just did not look right. It was solid tan in color, no spots or markings, and it had a long, slender tail, muzzle and snout, and body. I believe it also had very long ears that it had pressed against its head. It made absolutely no sound as it ran and only looked straight ahead as it crossed the street into the overgrown backyard of an abandoned home. I saw it for a few weeks, but I got a good look at it. I know it could have been a dog, but it just did not move like a dog. My husband thinks it's some sort of cryptid. We were tempted to explore the abandoned house and see what we could find. Today's fifth experience comes to us from central Wisconsin. Not too long ago, my brother was talking to my mom about something my dad had said to him quite a few years back that left him puzzled. My dad had passed away over 10 years ago, so I can't really ask him. My dad loved being in the woods. They were like a second home to him. Whenever we would take a family trip to the woods, I could ask him what any animal sound was that I heard from the area, and he could tell me exactly what animal was making it and any other detail I needed. He grew up on a farm and spent time as a forest ranger working in fire towers, and he enjoyed hunting, so he was pretty familiar with nature. The woods that we would take our family trips to, he was very familiar with, as some of the fire towers he worked in were still standing in the area. I think only one tower remains now. My brother said that there was a weekend that my dad decided to take a trip to the woods by himself to do some small game hunting. Not unusual for him. The strange part was that my dad had come home early. From where we lived at the time, it took him about 2.5 hours, and sometimes longer depending on traffic, to get to the woods he liked. He didn't spend the night, even though he had brought everything he needed to camp with for 2 nights. Both my mom and my brother remember him coming home early, only my dad never mentioned why to my mom, and only let it slip to my brother once. My dad told my brother that he heard something make a sound in the woods, a sound that he had never heard in his entire life. He knew it wasn't from any animals in the woods. The sound made him pack up and head home immediately during the night. My brother tried to press him for more details, but he quickly changed the subject and never wanted to discuss it again. He never described what type of sound it was. He said that it was not any form of animal that was inhabiting those woods. My dad was never easily spooked, especially by nature. Whatever he had heard, we have no idea, but it sure got the best of him. It eats at me that I can't ask him about it. My brother still takes trips to those woods, and they've never heard anything out of the ordinary while they've been out there. How about a bonus encounter to end the night with? My friend and I were hiking the Blue Ridge, Georgia. We were just going camping for one night, and the trail was part of the Appalachian Trail near the very start of it. My friend told a story about one of his friends and said that he had heard voices and footsteps at night near Blood Mountain, and he had to hike the night because the noises were so intense. So, back to the main story, we found a campsite and set up shop. As it got darker, we got a bad feeling like something was watching us. Then it started. We saw a pair of glowing red eyes about 150 feet away from our fire. Then my friend goes to dunk his head in the creek near our tent and claims something pushed him into the water. His shirt was soaked and he hit his nose on a rock and it was bleeding. Then after that we heard a woman's voice. We couldn't really make it out. We heard it in front of us, behind us, and to the left of us over a creek. It could have been a night hiker, but to the left there was no trail, and night hikers usually use flashlights. We also heard footsteps around us and sticks snapping. We finally just got in the tent and tried to sleep. My friend fell asleep before I did. And I heard twigs snapping right next to my head outside of the tent. And that's pretty much it. Very creepy. If you decide to go camping at Blue Ridge, just know there are things lurking out there at night. Well, we started the second half on Blood Mountain and we ended it on Blood Mountain. So obviously something creepy's going on there. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed tonight's second half as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I want to thank you for all tuning in and all of your support. With that, may the Great Spirit watch over us all, and may He guide us down that path that we call life.